Welcome to Pioneers, the show where we explore the intersection between humanity and AI. I'm your host, Ankur Patel. Over the last 10 years, I've built 3 AI startups, written 2 books about the subject, and I run a weekly AI newsletter. I also regularly teach and speak about the topic at conferences. This technology has grown faster than I think any of us could have imagined, and it's making us ask really important questions, such as how ethical is AI? What will this technology look like in a few years, let alone a few months? And most importantly, does it have the power to truly change the world? And what does it mean for you? On this show, I'll be interviewing the founders, operators, and pioneers that are introducing AI into their companies and industries. We'll be asking them the really heavy-hitting questions that make them dig deep into the core of what we do. And without further ado, let's dive into today's episode. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Pioneers Podcast. I'm your host, Ankur Patel. Here with me today, we have Rob Bailey, the founder and CEO of Backbone AI. Very excited to have you, Rob.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
Would love to hear how you got started in this space of AI and really even the origin story behind Backbone.
Great. So 2 separate stories. So the origin story about me and AI actually goes back to the 90s. I read a book called Complexity. I think it was published in 1992 that was about chaos theory and complex adaptive systems. And so from a theoretical standpoint, that's when I really started to think about how you might be able to use technology to mimic artificial intelligence. Of course, I think it took a few decades for the reality of technology that was available to us to catch up with, some theories that were being thrown around in the 90s. So fell in love with AI in the 90s and then I think started to really get involved in AI-related companies over 10 years ago with a company called DataSift, which used some pretty heavy-duty AI and ML to process real-time unstructured data from sources like Twitter, Facebook, and publicly available news sources. If you like, I can also share a little bit about the origin story of Backbone specifically.
Yes, please. I think a lot of our viewers would love that.
The origin story for Backbone is random and crazy. And I'll try to tell the very short version of it for you since we only have a limited amount of time today. I had previously was part of a founding executive team at a company called Customer, which was AI for support teams. I was there sort of for the first few years, 2016, 2017, helped the founders scale up the company. And then I went on to take a little bit of time off to do a blockchain fund back when that was a thing. So spent a few years looking at blockchain. I was in love with the idea of using blockchain technology to manage supply chain data, much more so than cryptocurrency. We actually didn't do any crypto deals. I was very focused on how different companies could use blockchain technology to make supply chains more efficient and do multi-party coordination. So over the course of a few years, I looked at 50 plus companies, several of them really awesome. But just really didn't find an investment opportunity. So I started talking to Fortune 500s. And interestingly enough, I randomly, through a supply chain innovation center, ended up meeting with a company called Motion Industries. They're a US-based top 10 industrial distributor based in Birmingham, Alabama. So I had a first meeting with them, I think back in, might have been 2019. About using blockchain technology to coordinate the distribution of safety data between industrial companies in the United States. So went into a huge meeting with execs at Motion Industries, and the talk was originally about how we could use blockchain to distribute safety data. After about 3-4 months of spending time with them and with other companies, we came to the conclusion that there was actually a bigger opportunity, which was to use AI to actually process all kinds of data that were coursing between suppliers and distributors, specifically in industrial in the US. So it started out as blockchain technology for safety data, and it morphed into using AI to transform the data that goes between suppliers, distributors, and retailers in the United States.
That's great. I think what it shows, which is not surprising, but always very interesting to hear, is that the initial origin of an idea really morphs over time, right? Little pivots, sometimes hard pivots, ultimately get to where the idea really needs to be in order for it to be a viable product and then ultimately a business. Could you walk us through the value that your technology provides in this space? Because obviously this is an age-old space. People were dealing with this in some way before. What was that problem, and then basically where did you come in to introduce a better way of doing things?
So there's $25 trillion worth of supply chains around the world.
Mhm.
And I would say that of the data, there's, I think, depending on how you cut it, anywhere between 25 and $30 billion worth of software sold every year to kind of manage those supply chains around the world. What's There's a few things that are really surprising about it. One, there's a huge number of providers. So if you look at a software category like CRM, there's a clear leader, Salesforce, social networks for business, LinkedIn. When you look at
Mhm.
supply chain software, although there's some really big, great companies like SAP, Oracle, and Infor, also Microsoft, you'd be surprised across all the different supply chain related software categories. There rarely is a company that has more than 15 to 20% of the market share. So, what that means is huge software category, no clear dominant players, so tons of different software programs that have to integrate with each other. So what that means is that a lot of companies that manage supply chains and that even have these kind of big software implementations are typically building data bridges between software using
Mhm.
Excel spreadsheets. So to sum it up, $25 trillion worth of supply chains around the world that are frequently held together by people emailing each other spreadsheets, which is insane. And so that really creates an enormous data opportunity to find ways to essentially use AI to build data bridges between these different applications.
Mhm.
So
Yeah,
that's been our mission, is to set out to do that.
no, I think that makes a lot of sense, particularly if you look at consumer, and then as you mentioned, some B two B as well. There's a clear category leader, right? So it's winner take all. But in a lot of enterprise, particularly, I would say like the older industries that have been around for a very long time, they tend to be fragmented. There is no clear winner. Which means that there's an opportunity to disrupt and get a meaningful market share, especially because the TAM is so large in those markets that even if you get a relatively small slice in that fragmented space, it ends up being a huge market opportunity. Could you walk us through when you started introducing Backbone to prospects? I mean, I imagine that not many of them are AI savvy. How did you actually make that sale? Because I could imagine it's a very daunting sale to make to an audience that isn't familiar with the technology necessarily.
Absolutely. So we started securing our lead customers in advance of launching our product back in 2019. And we came out of stealth in 2020 with some big announcements and started to scale up with customers 2020 into 2021. So we sort of perfectly dovetailed, as it turns out, launching the company and using AI to process supply chain data with the COVID epidemic, which actually ended up accelerating this kind of shift to online. And that's actually been a huge tidal wave change in what's happening in supply chains, which is this massive shift from offline sales to online sales. And that was
Mhm.
accelerated by the COVID epidemic. And we're an accelerant of that as well.
I think that's great. It's COVID ended up being the timing catalyst for you, right? And then now it gets easier because people are aware of different types of AI. It's much more mainstream. But 2019, and certainly earlier, and then kind of using COVID as a catalyst. And then where specifically does AI come in, and how do you think about building defensibility in the AI that you apply, the machine learning models that you apply? Given that you keep seeing newer models with newer capabilities, where does that moat ultimately happen for you?
Great question. So, let me talk first a little bit about what we do, and then I'll talk about how we build defensibility over time. So, if you have suppliers, manufacturers, and distributors, you have hundreds of suppliers and manufacturers that are sending their product data to distributors.
Mhm.
And the faster that distributors can kind of transform and clean up that data and upload it into their online catalogs, the more they can sell. So there is an incredible war going on right now for data quality between B2B distributors in categories like industrial, automotive, construction, electrical, et cetera. So all of these, Fortune 500 companies are spending enormous amounts of money to get data from suppliers and manufacturers, ingest it, transform it, and activate it live into their catalogs.
Mhm.
10 years ago, the way a typical B2B sale might happen is two people might go play golf. With Gen Z and millennials increasingly in purchasing positions, um, we found that the way that B2B buying is happening of physical products is changing.
Mhm.
Instead of golf games, especially Gen Z and millennial buyers and buyers in general, they just want to go online and look at catalogs. And we found that increasingly online catalogs are driving sales of obviously online sales, but even offline sales. And the most important factor for how successful your catalog is how good the quality of your data is.
Mhm.
So, Anchor, I would imagine, if you were shopping on Amazon and you came to a web page for, say, a frying pan that had a low quality picture and almost no product data, would you buy that product?
No, there's no confidence in the product. I would pass on it.
Exactly. So people use the quality of images and the coverage of text-based content on a product page as a proxy for how good the product is. So imagine if you wouldn't buy a frying pan if the product page was bad. Imagine considering buying a $10,000 piece of machinery or a $50,000 piece of machinery if it had a bad product page.
Mhm.
You wouldn't. And yet, that is what we're frequently finding in B2B, which you have these enormous catalogs and frequently you have low quality images and almost no product information. It's crazy. And so
Yeah.
this provides just a multi-billion dollar opportunity for companies that can upgrade and improve the quality of their product data and their catalogs.
Yeah. And how does it work technically? So, what do you receive from the, I guess, basically the companies that want to get their data into the catalog, right? So, they want some digital form for the data that they have, for the products that they have. How does that work? Could you just walk me through maybe one of the workflows that you do for your clients?
Absolutely. And it doesn't work the way you might think. So the way you would think that it would probably work is direct API to API connectivity. And we actually have, I'm not sure if you remember a company called Mashery. They're one of the original pioneers in this kind of API economy. The founder and
Mhm.
CEO of that company, Oren, is actually an investor in our company. And we originally thought and envisioned this kind of absolutely complex network of API to API connectivity with smart wrappers around it, similar to what Mashery did in the early days with the enablement of API out and in API connect endpoints. Um, Companies like Segment, and that's where we thought things were going. That's
Mhm.
not what's happened. What we have found is that IT organizations usually have extremely stringent requirements around API to API connectivity. So the way we've actually moved faster is we have a self-service platform that enables manufacturers and distributors and their data teams to upload files in a variety of different formats to our platform. And then our platform then kind of transforms the data. So people are uploading, believe it or not, spreadsheets,
Mhm.
CSVs, zip files. It's crazy. But
Yeah.
that is what has worked the best. I mean, you'd be surprised in supply chains. There are even some companies we've seen that use faxes and even paper-based catalogs.
Mhm.
So we have this self-service platform that enables data teams to upload the data. Our platform then ingests the data, assesses it, and then based on what the user wants to do with the data on the platform, will typically begin iterative transformations on the data. Um, we have a tech-enabled services team, and then we also have a bunch of self-service tools.
Mhm.
The fastest growing part of our business right now is definitely these self-service AI tools that enable powerful kind of bulk transformation of data around images and text-based content. And I could dig more into those if you'd like.
Yeah. No, I think that makes sense. I think the fact that you made it self-serve opens up the technology to many end users because now all of a sudden they can take their files in whatever form that they have, they upload it. And I imagine that's where the models kick in, where they structure, let's say, image data into data that you might see that's clean, structured like in a JSON format. Um, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm just curious. Sort of, once that structuring happens, what happens next with the data, right? Because now they've got clean structured data, and then it needs to be fed into some catalog somewhere, I imagine.
Yeah. So typically the way it works is we would then do so we assess the data, we transform the data in an iterative way. There's typically, depending on the data type, there's typically several rounds of redundant QA to ensure data quality.
Mhm.
And then that is then published out. We can actually deliver it via API into the back of an application, Excel spreadsheets, whatever format you like. A lot of these companies, especially on the distributor and retailer side, are structured in such a way that they actually are very used to receiving Excel spreadsheets as they frequently do from their suppliers, which are then
Mhm.
uploaded into their CMSs and PIMs.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense. That's sort of how you're converting the data, right? There's a huge data transformation process that happens when you're using AI there. Do you leverage any of the AI that you build for more predictive modeling, so anticipating and managing changes, for example, to supply chain dynamics, or perhaps monitoring which industries are affected by external factors like regulatory changes?
Short answer is no. Um,
Mhm.
the use of predictive AI is just has enormous potential for supply chains, and we're seeing a lot of really interesting companies do it,
Mhm.
especially around inventory management, which is, I mean, there's just enormous financial opportunities to make inventory more efficient in companies, and we're seeing some very interesting companies do that. I think they have some basic predictive capabilities. There's a company called Verusen out of Atlanta that's doing some really interesting stuff, but predictive is not something that we have focused on today.
Got it. Got it. That makes sense. And I think the other big thing that's so critical is that even if you have great technology, you have great technologists, great product. A lot of times with startups, the challenge is sales, right? Getting in front of customers, make sure they have the right buyer, or the buyer has intent, the buyer pulls the trigger, and then making sure that there is some sort of revenue potential, not in the short term, but potentially even in the long term. Have you thought about the go-to-market motion around the AI products that you build, particularly perhaps with an eye towards having some line of recurring revenue from the clients that you bring on?
Absolutely. I've been scaling AI companies for 10 years, and there's always been a really key recurring theme. And that's that you focus on value, not the technology. Everybody loves to talk about AI, and ChatGPT is getting obviously a tremendous amount of
Yeah.
buzz right now. But at the end of the day, when you're selling into customers, especially enterprise customers, and especially savvy companies that manage physical supply chains, at the end of the day, what they really care about is ROI. What
Yeah.
is the investment and what is the value? So we are really focused on that. As an example, in the past few months, we started something called Project Benchmark, where we've actually
Mhm.
been going out and benchmarking the data quality of top industrial and electrical distributors, and then actually mapping the performance of those companies financially with their data quality. And we've seen some very interesting correlations. So, put simply, if you have better data, you're growing your online sales faster. I mean, it's not rocket science, but it's been fascinating to see the hard results of that really come out in the study. So we actually have, for example, a meeting on Monday with a top 10 industrial distributor, and it is shocking how bad their data is.
Mhm.
And we think they may be missing tens of millions in lost revenue on a yearly basis because their data is so bad.
Wow. Wow. Yeah. I mean, I think what you're saying is keeping it simple. Um, deliver value, right? And sell that value. The ROI is so critical, and don't get hung up on the technology. I think leaning into that a little bit, could you share a story, perhaps a transformation story where Backbone AI significantly changed a customer's approach to managing product data, ultimately having massive business impact in due time?
Yes, absolutely. So we work, and I have to be careful in what I can say because obviously we have NDAs in place. Um, if you were to go to our website, you would see that MSC Industrial, which is one of the top 10 industrial distributors, and from our point of view, one of the best run distributors in the US in B2B, they are on our website, and quoting is working with us. What you would also find is that in the past 18 months, they went from, I think, number 6 or number 7 in image quality to they are currently in our benchmark study rated as number 1. To
Hmm.
be clear, the rating in that study are all based on publicly available information from public product catalogs, so not on any kind of confidential information or anything like that. So in the past year and a half, they have gone from number 6 to number 1.
Hmm.
And I think they've done some very interesting moves behind the scenes in terms of how they're using tools to improve image quality. So I'm sorry if I'm being a bit vague, but I'm just trying to be very respectful of the confidentiality agreements that we've signed with them.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. But I think our the people in the audience can refer to that, and we probably put that in the show notes as well for our listeners. No, I think that that's great. What are you seeing in the larger space now as more companies, like in both buyers being aware of AI and more companies starting up because AI is so hot, they're rebranding as AI, they're getting funding, potentially they're in maybe the space that you're in. How do you think about competition as it's evolving? I imagine competition in the sense of there's more marketing talk, right? That's potentially disruptive to you in terms of being able to get your brand out there, and then potentially companies that are actually using AI in a real manner, where they're trying to get a little piece of the pie in the broader space that you're in.
We live in fascinating times right now. I mean, I've been working on AI companies for more than 10 years, and I have never seen such an exciting time to be doing AI. And I think, obviously there's been several accelerants, including, kind of the rise of transformers, et cetera, the popularization of
Yeah.
ChatGPT. Um, a few years ago, when we first started talking to supply chain companies about using AI to transform their data, I think there was a lot more skepticism. And while there's
Yeah.
still a healthy level of skepticism, it's been incredible to watch how companies like OpenAI have really mainstreamed the acceptance of AI for transforming business processes. And there's tons of other companies out there doing this as well, Salonis, et cetera. And what we have found is one, things are moving very fast. So, we spend, I would say, probably, depending on what role we're talking about here, but typically, um, many of us in the company are spending as much as 20% of our time just kind of keeping up to date with what's going on, evaluating new technologies, benchmarking,
Yeah.
et cetera, et cetera. And so we're definitely investing quite a bit of time at staying on the forefront and making sure that we are building our platform on the best possible technology out there. I will say it is very clearly for text-based content, OpenAI right now.
Yeah.
And for image processing, it's a variety of different kind of open source tech that we've kind of patchworked together. But we are constantly watching what's going on. And I think if there is one central theme, it's move fast, adapt fast. So um, we, for example, recently did a benchmark study. We do image processing, assessment and processing. So we actually did some very interesting benchmarking against Adobe, which is obviously an absolutely incredible company in images, and benchmarked our quality versus theirs. We were positively surprised with how we did versus Adobe, but
Mhm.
I mean, Adobe's an incredible company. So just because we might have done well vis-a-vis them in a benchmark, in November of 2023, doesn't mean anything long term. So we are working
Mhm.
furiously to constantly be tuning our neural nets, branching out neural nets by product categories so that we can do optimal tuning, et cetera. So move fast, adapt fast.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's right. I think you can't build with your head down for 2 years and hope that your technology that's been built is competitive. And I think you have to have one ear listening, hearing, applying the latest technologies, right? And if you're not, you won't be malleable and nimble enough to go and adopt that technology into your stack to remain very, very competitive. I think that's absolutely right. You have to go and adopt the latest and greatest, and a lot of times that's coming from different players. It's not even single player. Like I know OpenAI gets a lot of attention, but they're not the only name in town. There's
Mhm.
so much innovation happening in the broader space, especially in the open source community, right? So just shifting gears here a little bit, obviously you have very complex product data that you're processing for your clients. How do you navigate the ethical and privacy concerns with the data that you manage, particularly if you're dealing with any sensitive information?
Yes. So the good news for us, and one of the great things about our model, is that we primarily work with publicly available data. So data security and privacy is extremely important. And if AI companies do not address it, they will fail. Um, and while I applaud these kind of industry-wide statements and efforts and proclamations around data quality, I think the reality is that if you're an AI company and you are not being thoughtful about addressing privacy and data security issues, you will be out of business. Fortune
Yeah.
500's enterprise customers are very, very savvy. The IT leaders that we work with at different companies are very, very thoughtful about the importance of data security, provenance, copyright, et cetera. And you will be out of business if you don't take those into account. So I think that market forces are going to drive some very thoughtful adoption of privacy measures, et cetera. And I think what you'll end up seeing is a greater level of respect and protection for data in B2B than what you probably have in B2C with social networks.
Yep. I think that's right. I think that's right. I think the scrutiny is so massive. And it's going to be so important to be a market leader, right? Leading the pack, shaping it. You don't want to be caught on the wrong side of this. And you also have to be nimble there because the regulatory environment is shifting quite a lot. And especially if your customers for enterprise, they will be affected, which means you'll be affected in due process. Um, so I think looking at your startup, right, it's been around for a number of years. Could you maybe just give us a little bit of background around where in that startup life cycle you are today? And then as you look ahead, what is that big next milestone? If it's a next round of fundraising or some sort of metric that you're tracking, that would be really helpful for our audience.
Well, growing a company in 2023 with where the market is very, very different than growing a company in 2020. So we've
Mhm.
gone from, I think a kind of one way of putting it is we went from ZERP times to honey badger times. So we've raised a pretty healthy amount of seed funding. So more, somewhere between 5 and 10 million in seed
Yep.
funding, which is on the high side in today's market conditions. Um, in 2023, we have grown our customer revenues fivefold, and we are now cash flow positive as of last month. So it is unclear if we're going to need to raise any more money from investors.
Yeah. No, congratulations. I mean, that feels amazing, right? To be able to get to cash flow positive, where you're more in control of your destiny because you're not incurring some massive burn, which puts you on the VC cycle even more aggressively than you otherwise would like to be, right? So that's great. And then as you think about scaling the business, do you want to keep the business cash flow positive, or would there be some benefit in maybe getting a bigger piece of the market faster than, let's say, would be upstarts that are trying to also be in this space? Have you thought about any up and coming pressures from the market as a whole?
Our industry changes so much. If you take, for example, a company like SVB that was, sort of a pillar of our industry and went from, sort of one of the most secure places to put your money to obviously a company that had its challenges. Uh,
Yeah.
the one constant about our industry is change, And therefore, I think having a long-term plan in terms of what you're going to do with the business is always going to be subject to the kind of ups and downs of the industry. But for now, we are very confident in the revenue we're able to generate from our customers. And we plan to continue to grow in a very thoughtful, cash efficient manner. We would probably consider raising money from third parties in the future, but we don't have immediate cash needs to do so right now.
Yeah. No, I think that makes sense. You could grow very methodically, right? I think you have that privilege given where you are in terms of revenue growth. And then
Yeah.
go ahead, Rob.
Yeah, I was going to say growing in a cash positive, cash efficient manner is actually brutal. I mean, it's very hard. You have to make a lot of tough decisions. You have to, do a ton of prioritization, and the team has to run really tight. So it's challenging, but it makes you better. So I think we are a better, more efficient, faster moving company now in these kind of honey badger times than I think we were during
Yeah.
SERP times.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think capital efficiency is so critical. It's always critical, but I think it's easy to get. Um, Basically, you lose that discipline in market like 2021, where capital is so abundant and there's FOMO, and you don't want to be the odd party out. When everyone's kind of raising these big rounds. Now, since capital is harder to come by, it puts capital efficiency to the forefront. And then if you could get to the other side, to run a business that's cash flow neutral or cash flow positive, then all of a sudden you could run the business sustainably, right? And then you have the option, you have the best option at that point to go raise when you want to, because on paper and in reality, the business is very sound. The unit economics are there because you've had to make really hard decisions to get it to become cash flow positive in the first place, right? What about talent? Like, as you think about building a business, building out a really great team that's technically sound, particularly in artificial intelligence, where you see a lot of the bigger tech companies kind of gobble up a lot of the talent, and then you see very large venture-backed startups gobble up talent. And how do you think about competing in that? Do you look at talent, let's say in the United States? Do you have talent that's overseas? How do you think about assembling a great team in this market?
I don't think there's one right model. I think there's a lot of different models. I've scaled teams that are 100% US, and I've scaled teams that are majority non-US. Currently with Backbone, the majority of our team is non-US, and most of our engineering is in Eastern Europe. I think that the world's really changed. And I'm telling you things, that obviously I'm sure your listeners already know, but I've just been blown away in the last few years with the quality of technical and success talent outside of the US. So the majority of our engineering and success teams or data teams are outside of the US, and they're incredible.
Mhm.
Our VP of, sorry, VP of customer success is in the US, but not in one of the major cities. And a lot of our engineering team, again, is in Eastern Europe, and they are absolutely phenomenal. I've just been blown away with the quality of talent. I think that there is the dimension of talent quality, which I think is at this point equal non-US to US. But then I think there's also the concept of work culture.
Mhm.
And I've been blown away with how focused and dedicated non-US team members are. And they've, I would say are on equal par with US based folks, which 10 years ago was it true in some cases, but not all cases. But um, the world may be becoming more divided politically, but we are finding the world is getting flatter in terms of talent. And I feel really blessed and lucky to be working with the caliber of talent that I'm working with outside of the US and
Yeah.
also in the US that are outside of New York and sort of major traditional areas like New York and San Francisco. So everybody always has known that there's great talent in New York and San Francisco and other markets like
Yeah.
Austin, Seattle. But I've just been blown away with just how much exceptional talent exists in the US outside of those metro markets in places like Atlanta and Michigan,
Mhm.
as well as outside of the US. So tons of talent everywhere. You just have to work hard to find it.
Yeah, and then once you know where that talent lives and you know how to target them, then now all of a sudden you have this special power because you're able to find talent at great value around the world, right, across the U.S. as well. What about that company culture, though, right? Obviously, AI is moving fast. You have people that are dialed in, kind of staying on top of the latest techniques and such. But it can often feel like when you work in a remote environment, that you're off on an island by yourself. You have things that you're reporting on, your to-dos. You have a couple of check-ins, maybe you have a stand, but that physical in-person chemistry is hard, right? It's hard to make happen. How do you think about as you scale the team and build really strong corporate culture to keep that potentially that physical connection with the team intact as you continue to grow over the years?
There's lots of ways of looking at company culture. Company culture and team happiness are extremely important to me, and we spend a lot of time thinking about it. I look at a company sort of like it's a sports team, in the sense that there's a lot of similar dynamics. And I think you can actually do a great job of building a culture in a remote company if you do things like one, hire good people, two, ensure regular, consistent communication, three, identify top performers and give them really interesting, challenging work to work on, and support them in any way that they need.
Mm-hmm.
So even though my team is globally distributed, I feel like we have a very strong culture, and that is a culture that focuses on winning, executing well, um, collaborating within the
Yeah.
team. As an example, I very regularly check our ratings on Glassdoor. We are a
Mm-hmm.
5 out of 5, and I think we, as far as I can tell, outperform in terms of Glassdoor ratings a lot of companies that work in person. Um, so
Sure.
um, Culture is important to me. We track it, but I think there's ways to build culture in a remote team. And we also do a lot of things. I mean, we all get, we know each other personally. We have lots of little things like, we try to spend the first 5 minutes of meetings kind of just doing check-ins, especially at the beginning of the week. So there's a lot of little things that we do to manage culture. But at the end of the day, if you just create a positive work environment where people can just get stuff done with minimal drama and
Yeah.
lots of collaboration, I found that that's just an awesome way to build culture.
That's great. I think that's beautiful advice. I mean, in a way, it feels so intuitive, and yet I think people forget that regardless of whether it's a remote setting or an in person setting, that the fundamentals still apply, right? The basic principles still apply. That's great. Thanks, Rob. Looking ahead, how do you see AI further transforming the supply chain management of complex industries? Let's say in the next 5 to 10 years, and how do you think backbone AI will play a role in this evolution?
I think we're in the very, very early days. Like, if you think about the enormous amount of impact that AI is going to have on supply chains, I mean, I think we're 5 to 10% into the potential of what we're going to see. So
Yeah.
we're already seeing some very fascinating green shoots in terms of how AI is affecting supply chains. And I think some great examples of this are obviously what we do with using AI to do data transformation around product data. But I think there's lots of other great examples of it as well. I think AI powered inventory optimization is a great
Mhm.
example of that. There's a company called Verusen doing that in Atlanta. Two, I think there's very interesting AI that's being applied to things like POs, payments, payment terms, cash flows,
Mhm.
etc. I think that's another very interesting area of AI. So those are all around kind of the more data oriented aspects of supply chains. If we look at kind of the physical dimension of supply chains, there's also a ton of really interesting AI being used. So,
Yeah.
um, AI powered fleet optimization and route management optimization, fascinating. Robots like the automated warehouses that Amazon has that are going
Mhm.
to start to go mainstream. Another great example, driverless trucks, which hopefully will go fully mainstream one day, is another example. So I think we're just seeing just endless numbers of use cases for how AI is going to transform supply chains over the years.
No, I think that's right. I think it's even like by function, right? As you said, the POs, invoices, helping improve the kind of the very standard things that have to happen to make supply chain logistics work, right? You're seeing players that are occupying those specific functions, and then robotics. I mean, robotics has been around for a very long time, as you said. But I think seeing that develop to a point where maybe more companies can benefit from like the robots that Amazon uses at scale for their business, if that becomes much more mainstream, that could really help out quite a bit. No, I think that makes a lot of sense. Um, how do you personally bring a human lens to AI? And what's the Rob Bailey secret sauce when it comes to AI?
I fundamentally believe that AI is going to be around enhancing humans' capabilities much more so than replacing them. And so I think that probably the most foundational way that you can make AI more human is to look at how it can improve people's lives.
Hmm.
And so a great example is with what we do with Backbone. We essentially try to automate a lot of the high volume repetitive activities, such as photo retouching, that, kind of really sucks for humans to do. So they can focus on the more higher value activities like QA, flows, optimization by data destination, et cetera. So I think that one of the best ways that AI can improve people's lives is, again, basically automating the routine, repetitive work so that people can do higher value work.
I think you
Um,
couldn't have said that any better, Rob. It's fundamental to what we do here at Multimodal as well. There's a lot of work that's happening in the office, in the workplace, that machine learning models are very well equipped to do, and a lot of that is the really manual, repetitive work that really no human wants to do. Right? They'd rather be doing higher value work. But what happens is that until now, the technology to go and do that very manual, repetitive work didn't really exist. It was harder to work with. Now, all of a sudden, the technology is mature enough where it can replace the human need to do that repetitive work. It frees up human time, and they could do more higher value work thereafter, right? So it's been really well received by clients that we work with, and I think you're saying the same thing, which is it's great to see that that we're aligned there, and I think a lot of the people in the audience that listen to this will likely feel the same way. Um, so obviously you have this storied career, very experienced, scaling up multiple companies, having a phenomenal ride with Backbone AI here. Um, Maybe let's talk a little bit about the what makes you successful, right? So, in terms of changes in artificial intelligence and machine learning, what do you do on a weekly or daily basis to stay on top of everything that's happening while still continuing to operate your business?
it's a heavy lift. um, there is so much progress and so much exciting stuff happening in AI that I view keeping up with what's going on an important part of being a CEO in AI. And I think that both for my team internally as well as our customers, there's a certain expectation that we're going to be kind of fresh and know what's going on. So the short answer is I do lots of stuff. The slightly longer answer is Twitter, WhatsApp groups. So James Cham, for example, added me to a WhatsApp group that is focused on AI with tons of founders,
Mm-hmm.
and that has been phenomenal for keeping me up to date. It's just kind of what people are talking about. I hate to say it, but conferences. You have to, I think it's easy as a founder to burn all your life in conferences, and you definitely don't want to do that. But I have found that attending some AI conferences, either in person or online, is very important. A few weeks ago, I was lucky enough to be invited to participate in Insight Ventures, Insight Partners, I think it's called,
Yeah.
conference focused on AI. They had just an incredible roster of speakers and attendees. I was lucky to be included. And I think I spent several months emailing them trying to get a spot. And I mean, I met an executive from a company, a software company, told them about what we are working on, and we're now in partnership discussions, very early stage discussions,
Mm-hmm.
but partnership discussions that could be transformational for us as a company. And so I'd say, definitely being out and about and networking is really important. I also have hosted rooftop events with different VCs, as well as attended ones organized by others. Um, I have a little bit of FOMO about not living in San Francisco. There's just an incredible amount of really high quality AI events happening on a regular basis, especially in Hayes Valley. Wish I lived in San Francisco sometimes, but there's definitely lots of good stuff going on everywhere.
Yeah, completely agree. I mean, I think that's awesome. I think to hear that, right? The conferences in person networking opportunities have been awesome, but I think the low hanging fruit is getting into groups that are active. Twitter obviously has been great for breaking news. So, thanks for sharing that. I think that makes a lot of sense. Something that's going to be valuable to our listeners. Um, let's maybe talk about this New York City versus San Francisco bit, right? Because San Francisco obviously has been the big elephant in the room. They've been a juggernaut for the longest time. Seems like in recent years, New York City has come up quite a bit more. Obviously, some VC firms here are very prominent. Some New York City-based VC funds. Fintech has been really hot for New York City. Crypto has been very hot for New York City. AI in some capacity also very hot. How do you think about the activity that's happening both on maybe the VC front, but then also on the founder operator front between the two cities today? How do you think about the differences between the New York City scene versus the San Francisco scene?
I love the Bay Area. I lived there for 17 years. And for a very long time, the Bay Area was was the place if you were going to build an enterprise software company. That's no longer true. And I think that that is a net positive if you look at our industry long term. There are now lots of different cities where you can build enterprise software companies: Paris, London, New York,
Mm-hmm.
even places like Miami and Los Angeles. And I think that is net positive. Um, I think they said, one of my favorite quotes was somewhere along the lines of, talent is evenly distributed, but opportunity isn't. And I think it's been awesome to watch this kind of spread of opportunity across different cities. I think big companies like Google and Facebook are helping by building out talent centers in different cities. So I think that Bay Area is still a fantastic place to scale companies, especially tech-focused AI companies. It's a great place to scale companies and to raise money. But I think we're now seeing that there are a lot of great alternatives. I personally think that New York is going to be the best place to be for the next 10 years if you're a founder and you want to build companies. And that is because there is a growing pool of talent in New York. You're also near other places like Boston and London,
Mm-hmm.
and you're near to customers. I think AI is really only going to succeed long term in its different use cases if we sell to companies that influence people's lives: retailers, consumer
Yeah.
products companies, industrial companies. You can't build an industry solely having tech companies that sell to each other. You have to
Yeah.
sell to end companies. And New York, broadly speaking, has one of the best concentrations of potential customers in the world across financial, retail, fashion, news, etc. So I think New York is an awesome place to be as a founder. There's also great quality of life here. There's a high level of density. So New York is the best place personally, but I think there's lots of other great places to build companies. Obviously the Bay Area is fantastic for tech talent, lots of other places as well. But I love New York, and I could not be more long New York for the next 10 years.
Sure. Yeah, no, that makes sense. I've been in New York for a very long time, last 14 years. Have been to SF just on trips, business trips and such over the years. And there's always been this draw about the Bay Area just because of the density of talent and everyone's in tech, which could be a good thing or a bad thing, depending
Hmm.
on how plugged in you want to be. But it does feel like New York City is now has a very, very viable ecosystem. And I think you're absolutely right that the buyers of technology are very much here, especially in the very well industries that you mentioned, like finance and retail. I think those big markets here are very large, very deep. So if you want to be close to the buyers and close to capital, particularly if you have public exits in mind, New York City is a phenomenal place to be. So that checks out. That makes sense. Thanks for sharing that, especially since you've seen both sides of it. What are some of the best books for people to read this year? Beyond just anything on AI, just business books or books that you found to be inspirational.
Yeah, so I think that there is, I mean, honestly, I would say, let me kind of flip the question a little bit and actually say that I probably don't read as much as I should. So I think that some of the books that I might suggest are probably more traditional business books that have been around for a while. I think, Zero to One is a
Mhm.
great example. So I think you should definitely read the full canon of those type of books. But actually, what I would suggest to uh, sort of folks that want to get smarter on stuff is one, spend time on Twitter and curate the right people on Twitter. I think there's definitely a fair amount of controversy around certain political topics and stuff that Elon may have said recently. But I think Twitter is still a phenomenal place to network. So I think if you're very proactive at building
Mhm.
relationships with people that you follow on Twitter, I think Twitter can still be a fantastic place to network. I actually think I hate to say it, but I think LinkedIn can be also a pretty good for content as well, especially in terms of interfacing with end customers.
Mhm.
Um, we may all spend our time on places like Twitter, but end customers spend a lot of time on LinkedIn. So if you want to know what
Yeah.
buyers at Fortune 500s are thinking, you got to spend some time on LinkedIn. And here's where I'm really going to flip it around. Um, I think one of the best ways to get to mastery on a topic is to teach it, as they say. And to be clear, I didn't come up with that, but it's something I believe. And so,
Mhm.
what I would, if I could offer a suggestion to fellow founders, it's to, I mean, you certainly want to consume content and keep up to date and read papers and everything like that. But I think that I see founders reading quite a bit, but what I would encourage founders to do more of is produce their own content. So whether I'm
Yeah.
talking to founders or I'm talking to people trying to build their careers in tech and AI specifically, I strongly encourage people to start producing more of their own content that is compelling. So when people ask me what the best books are to read, I say if you have extra time, sure, read some books, read Zero to One, read handbooks on scaling startups. But at the end of the day, your time is probably going to best be spent by trying to produce content that is unique and compelling.
Yeah. Right. It gets their voice out there, and others can hear their ideas, right, and helps shape the ideas a bit more.
Kind
Rob,
of
it's
like
been a
you're doing.
pleasure having.
Kind of like you're doing.
Yeah, I firmly believe in that because I've been producing content a long time. I've written books. I've done like my AI newsletter came out in 2019. Have been keeping it up ever since, and now getting into podcasts. I think that by having a discourse like this, it helps me shape ideas, right? And then you also make great connections along the way. So while I think books are great, particularly books that you could learn from prior successes, like biographies of individuals, I think creating content is absolutely the right thing to do. It's harder to do, but it's really valuable long term. It just helps really crystallize a lot of the ideas that you have in your head that until they're on paper or communicated more broadly, don't take the full polished form that they need to. But Rob, it's been a pleasure having you on this podcast. Where can people find out more about you and Backbone? Do you have a call to action for our viewers?
Yes. One would be to go to our website, www.backbone.ai. But I would say beyond that, I would strongly encourage folks to just reach out to me directly. So I'm r@backbone.ai. And over the last few years, in my spare time, have helped hundreds of fellow founders, some of them in AI, and especially underrepresented founders. So I would just encourage anyone listening to this podcast, whether you have questions about Backbone and how Backbone can help automate data flows in supply chains, or you just want to uh, have a sounding board on just scaling your company or raising money or what VCs to talk to. I feel deeply grateful to be a founder in our industry, and I love to give back. So anything I can do to help fellow founders, I'd love to do. So feel free to just email me anytime at r@backbone.ai.
Amazing. I'm glad we have that, and we'll have it in the show notes too for our viewers. Rob, thanks for joining us for this podcast. It's been a pleasure chatting with you.
Likewise, thank you so much for having me, and look forward to staying in touch. Thank you so much for your time
Yeah,
too.
absolutely.
Thanks for interviewing me today.
Absolutely.